Keep your filthy kids away from decent families before they cause problems. Officer Derek Williams's harsh words slice through the peaceful afternoon at Riverside Park as Maya Johnson sits quietly on a bench, watching her 8-year-old daughter, Zara, play on the swings. The playground atmosphere shifts instantly. Other parents freeze, sensing the tension. Maya stands slowly, her voice steady but firm. "Excuse me, officer. What exactly is the problem here?" Williams steps closer, his face twisted with disgust. "The problem is people like you thinking you belong in family spaces. Pack up your little troublemaker and move along before this gets complicated." "People like me?" Maya's question hangs in the air like a challenge. What exactly do you mean by that? The slap comes without warning, Williams' hand connecting with her cheek with a crack that echoes across the entire park. Children scream. Parents frantically pull out phones. Zara drops from the swing, sobbing as she runs toward her mother. But Maya doesn't cry. She slowly turns back to face Williams, touching her burning cheek with unnaturally calm fingers. "Officer Derek Williams, badge number 4127, she says quietly, her voice carrying across the silent playground. What Williams doesn't know is that he just assaulted a federal agent who's been documenting his pattern of abuse for 3 weeks. Face discrimination in public spaces because of their race. Type justice below. 3 hours earlier, Maya Johnson had been reviewing surveillance notes in her modest apartment, preparing for another day of federal undercover work. Special Agent Johnson, 12 years with the FBI Civil Rights Division, had spent the past 3 weeks embedded in Chicago's South Side communities, documenting what formal complaints had failed to address: systematic harassment of Black and Latino families by local law enforcement. Her assignment seemed routine when it began. Multiple complaints against Officer Derek Williams and his partner Maria Rodriguez had mysteriously disappeared into administrative black holes. Families reported being forced from public spaces, children subjected to inappropriate searches, parents humiliated in front of their kids. But every formal complaint was either dismissed as unfounded or buried in bureaucratic delays. That's when the Department of Justice stepped in. When local systems fail to protect civil rights, federal oversight becomes necessary. Maya's job was simple: blend into the community, document violations, build an unassailable case for federal prosecution. She'd chosen her cover carefully. Single mother, government worker on flexible schedule, daughter who loved the playground at Riverside Park. The perfect position to observe Officer Williams during his routine patrols, to witness firsthand what complaints had tried to capture in inadequate bureaucratic language. Her phone buzzed with a text from Deputy Director Sarah Anderson. "Status update on surveillance operation?" Maya typed back quickly. "Pattern confirmed. Multiple constitutional violations documented. Recommend continuing current position for additional evidence collection." The response came immediately. "Understood. Maintain cover at all costs. We need ironclad documentation before proceeding. Maintain cover." Maya glanced at Zara, who was putting on her soccer cleats with the focused determination that 8-year-olds brought to everything important. Her daughter had no idea that their weekend park visits served dual purposes: quality time together and federal surveillance operations. "Mama, are we going to the park after practice?" Zara asked, her voice bright with anticipation. "Of course, baby, same bench, same view of the playground." What Zara also didn't know was that the same bench provided perfect sightlines for documenting police interactions with families. Maya had photographed 17 separate incidents over 3 weeks. Officer Williams approaching the Rodriguez family, claiming their grandson was too disruptive for other children, the Hernandez kids being ordered off playground equipment deemed inappropriate for their type. Mr. Johnson's 10-year-old son being forced to empty his pockets while shooting baskets alone. Each incident followed the same pattern. Officer Williams would approach minority families with manufactured complaints. When parents questioned his authority, he would escalate verbally, threatening Child Protective Services involvement or arrest for non-compliance. Most families left rather than risk further confrontation. Those who stayed found their names added to incident reports that portrayed them as aggressive or uncooperative. Maya's federal training had taught her to recognize these patterns. What looked like isolated incidents to community members revealed systematic discrimination to trained eyes. Officer Williams wasn't just having bad days, he was implementing an informal policy designed to exclude certain families from public spaces. Her surveillance equipment had captured audio and video evidence of constitutional violations that would make federal prosecutors smile. But yesterday's phone call from Washington had changed everything. "Agent Johnson," Deputy Director Anderson had said during their secure call, "new intelligence suggests Officer Williams may be planning something more aggressive. We've received tips about escalating behavior, possibly physical confrontations. Ma'am, based on my observations, he's been testing boundaries systematically: verbal intimidation, false reports, psychological pressure. Physical assault would be consistent with the escalation pattern." "How close are you to having sufficient evidence for charges?" Maya had reviewed her files. 3 weeks of documentation, multiple witnesses, clear pattern of discrimination. "Ma'am, we could proceed now. But if he does escalate to physical violence, we'd have the kind of evidence that makes cases unwinnable for defendants." "Your call, Agent Johnson, but if you're going to maintain cover longer, be careful. Men like Williams are dangerous when they feel threatened." Now sitting in Riverside Park with Zara playing nearby, Maya understood that her careful surveillance operation was about to become something much more personal and dangerous. What Officer Williams didn't know was that Maya had been watching him for 3 weeks, documenting every interaction, every violation, every moment of abuse that the community had endured in silence. Maya Johnson's path to this bench had begun 2 months ago in a sterile conference room at FBI headquarters in Chicago. Deputy Director Sarah Anderson had spread complaints across the table like evidence cards. Dozens of reports from Southside families, all describing the same officer, all mysteriously classified as unfounded or resolved through counseling. "The pattern is undeniable," Anderson had explained to the assembled civil rights team. "Officer Derek Williams, 8 years with Chicago PD, 47 formal complaints filed against him in the past 3 years. 0 sustained violations, 0 disciplinary actions, 0 consequences." The complaints painted a disturbing picture. Mrs. Rodriguez reported that Williams had told her grandson he didn't belong on the big kid equipment. The Hernandez family was forced to leave the park because their children were allegedly making other families uncomfortable. Mr. Thompson's teenage son was handcuffed and searched for fitting the description of a suspect, a description that apparently included being black and under 6 feet tall. "Local oversight has failed," Anderson continued. "Either they can't see the pattern or they don't want to see it. That's why we're implementing federal surveillance." Maya had studied Williams's personnel file. Born and raised in Chicago's northwest suburbs, all-white neighborhoods where diversity meant having Italian and Polish neighbors. Police Academy graduate, 8 years of steady promotions, commendations for community policing. On paper, he looked like a model officer, but the complaints revealed a different story. Williams had been systematically targeting minority families with selective enforcement, manufactured violations and intimidation tactics designed to exclude rather than protect. The kind of discrimination that local departments often failed to recognize or chose to ignore. "Agent Johnson," Anderson had said, "you're going deep cover. Single mother, flexible work schedule, daughter who uses public facilities. 3 to 4 weeks of embedded surveillance, document everything, build an unassailable federal case." The cover had required careful construction. Maya rented a modest apartment in the target neighborhood, enrolled Zara in local activities, established routines that would bring them into regular contact with Officer Williams's patrol area. To any observer, they looked like countless other single-parent families navigating weekend logistics. But Maya's background made her uniquely qualified for this assignment. 12 years with the FBI, specializing in civil rights violations. She'd investigated police departments in 7 states, documented systematic abuse in communities from Baltimore to Phoenix. She understood how discrimination worked, how it hid behind official procedures, how it destroyed families while protecting institutions. Her first week of surveillance had been routine. Officer Williams conducted standard patrols, issued parking tickets, responded to minor disturbances. But his interactions with minority residents were noticeably different. Longer stops, more aggressive questioning, reports filed for behavior that white residents performed without consequence. The second week revealed the pattern. Williams had learned which families used which facilities when they visited, how to time his presence for maximum intimidation effect. He would arrive just as children started playing, approach parents with manufactured complaints, escalate until families chose to leave rather than risk confrontation. Maya's federal training had taught her to document everything. Her surveillance equipment captured conversations, photographed interactions, recorded evidence that transformed individual complaints into systematic discrimination. But it also required her to witness injustices without intervening, to watch families being humiliated while maintaining her cover. The hardest part was explaining to Zara why they kept encountering the same officer, why other families seemed afraid, why playground visits sometimes ended abruptly when Williams appeared. 8-year-olds were naturally observant, and Zara had started asking questions that Maya struggled to answer without compromising her mission. "Mama, why does that policeman always look angry when he sees us?" "Some people have bad days, baby. Our job is to be respectful and stay safe. But he doesn't look angry at the white families." Children noticed things adults pretended not to see. Zara was identifying discriminatory patterns that Williams probably thought were subtle. Maya made notes about her daughter's observations. Even 8-year-olds could recognize systematic bias when they witnessed it repeatedly. Her surveillance position at Riverside Park had been perfect. The bench provided clear sightlines to the playground, the basketball court, and the walking path where Williams conducted his selective enforcement. She could document his interactions while appearing to simply watch her daughter play. 3 weeks of evidence had created a comprehensive case file. Photographs, audio recordings, witness statements, pattern analysis, everything federal prosecutors would need to prove systematic civil rights violations. Maya had been preparing to recommend transitioning to Phase 2, formal investigation with revealed federal presence. But yesterday morning's intelligence briefing had changed everything. Community sources reported that Williams was becoming more aggressive, more willing to use physical intimidation, the kind of escalation that preceded serious violence. "Agent Johnson," Anderson had warned during their secure call, "if Williams escalates to physical assault, you'll have the kind of evidence that guarantees conviction. But you'll also be putting yourself and your daughter at risk." "Ma'am, 3 weeks of surveillance suggests he's moving toward physical confrontation anyway. Someone's going to be his victim. At least I'm trained and prepared." Now, watching Zara play while Officer Williams approached their position, Maya understood that her carefully controlled surveillance operation was about to become something much more dangerous and personal. The playground fell silent as parents realized they were witnessing something that would change everything. But first, they needed to understand how 3 weeks of systematic documentation had led to this moment. Maya's surveillance had revealed a community living under siege. What looked like isolated incidents to individual families revealed systematic oppression when viewed through federal investigation methods. Her documentation showed Officer Williams operating with the precision of someone who believed his actions were not only justified, but encouraged. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez had been Maya's first documented witness. The 67-year-old grandmother brought her 8-year-old grandson Miguel to Riverside Park every Tuesday and Thursday, while his parents worked double shifts at the hospital. Maya had been observing from her usual bench when Williams approached their position near the swings. "Ma'am, we've had complaints about supervision issues in this area," Williams had announced, his voice carrying the false authority that Maya immediately recognized as selective enforcement. Mrs. Rodriguez looked around the nearly empty playground, confused. "Supervision issues? I'm watching my grandson play." "The big kid equipment is for children who can use it appropriately," Williams continued, pointing to Miguel, who was carefully navigating the climbing structure designed for his exact age group. Other families shouldn't have to worry about safety problems. Maya's surveillance equipment had captured the entire exchange. Mrs. Rodriguez asking what safety problems, Williams unable to provide specific examples, the conversation escalating until the grandmother gathered Miguel's backpack and led him away from equipment he had every right to use. Abuela, why can't I finish playing? Miguel had asked as they passed Maya's bench. Sometimes, mijo, we have to choose our battles. Mrs. Rodriguez had whispered, her voice carrying resignation that came from decades of similar encounters. But Maya had documented the truth. No safety violations, no complaints from other families, no justification for selective enforcement targeting a Latino child and his grandmother. Just systematic discrimination hiding behind official authority. The Hernandez family had provided Maya's second major documentation opportunity. Parents Maria and Carlos brought their 3 children to the park every Saturday morning. A weekly tradition that ended abruptly after Williams decided their family was disrupting the community atmosphere. Maya had watched the entire incident unfold. The Hernandez children playing soccer on the designated field, their parents spreading a picnic blanket nearby, Officer Williams approaching with manufactured complaints about noise violations and inappropriate use of facilities. "Sir, they're playing soccer on the soccer field," Carlos had said, gesturing to the clearly marked area where his children were following every posted rule. "The noise is disturbing other families," Williams had responded, despite the fact that the nearest other family was over 50 yards away and their own children were playing even more loudly. "What noise violations?" "They're just playing." "Sir, I need you to control your children, or we'll have to ask you to relocate to more appropriate facilities." Maya's federal training had immediately identified the language patterns. "Control your children" and "appropriate facilities" were coded phrases used to exclude minority families without explicitly stating racial motivations. Williams was implementing textbook discrimination while maintaining plausible deniability. The Hernandez family had complied rather than risk escalation. They'd packed their picnic, gathered their children, and left the public facility their tax dollars supported. But Maya had captured everything: the discriminatory language, the selective enforcement, the systematic exclusion of a Latino family from public spaces. Her third documented case had involved Mr. Jerome Johnson and his 10-year-old son, Marcus. Father and son visited the basketball court every Sunday afternoon, a bonding tradition that Williams had terminated with allegations of inappropriate behavior and disturbing the peace. Maya had positioned herself with clear sightlines to the court when Williams approached the Johnsons. Marcus was shooting baskets alone, while his father sat on the bench reading, both completely within their rights to use public facilities. "We've had reports about unsupervised children in this area," Williams had announced, despite the fact that Mr. Johnson was clearly supervising and Marcus was displaying exemplary behavior. "Reports from who?" "Mr. Johnson had asked, looking around the empty court area. "Children need appropriate adult supervision when using recreational facilities," Williams continued, implying that a black father sitting 15 feet from his son somehow constituted inadequate supervision. "I'm right here supervising my son. Sir, I need to see some identification and verify your relationship to this child." Maya's surveillance had captured the constitutional violation in real time. Williams demanding identification without reasonable suspicion, questioning a father's relationship to his own son, implementing selective enforcement that targeted black families with scrutiny that white families never experienced. Each documented incident followed identical patterns. Officer Williams approached minority families with manufactured complaints. When parents questioned his authority, he escalated with threats about child protective services, citations for non-existent violations, or demands for identification without legal justification. Most families chose to leave rather than risk further confrontation. But Maya's federal surveillance revealed the systematic nature of the discrimination. This wasn't random bias or isolated incidents. It was coordinated exclusion designed to create unofficially segregated public spaces. Williams had learned which families used which facilities and had developed timing strategies to maximize intimidation effects. Her documentation showed 17 separate incidents over 3 weeks. 17 families forced to leave public spaces without cause. 17 violations of constitutional rights that local oversight had failed to address. The kind of evidence that made federal civil rights prosecutions inevitable. What Williams didn't understand was that Maya had been building the case that would end his career while appearing to be just another single mother enjoying weekend park visits with her daughter. Maya's surveillance operation had evolved beyond simple observation to include systematic witness interviews that revealed the true scope of Williams's discriminatory enforcement. Each conversation added another layer to the pattern of abuse that federal prosecutors would use to build their case. Her first formal witness interview had been with Mrs. Rodriguez, the grandmother whose grandson Miguel had been excluded from playground equipment. Maya had approached her carefully the week after the incident, maintaining her cover as a concerned parent while gathering federal evidence. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I noticed what happened last Tuesday with the officer and Miguel. Has anything like that occurred before?" The elderly woman had looked around nervously before responding. "You seem like a nice lady, but I don't want to cause trouble for my family. I understand your concerns, but if there's a pattern of unfair treatment, people should know about it." Mrs. Rodriguez had studied Maya's face, searching for sincerity. Finally, she spoke in lowered tones that Maya's surveillance equipment captured clearly. "This is the 4th time in 2 months. Always the same officer, always the same complaints about Miguel being too disruptive or inappropriate for other children. What specific reasons does he give? Last month, he said Miguel was climbing too aggressively. The month before, he said we were staying too long and other families needed access. But I see white families stay for hours and their children climb the same equipment without any problems." Maya's federal training helped her recognize the significance of Mrs. Rodriguez's observations. The witness was identifying comparative enforcement, minorities being held to standards that whites didn't face. Classical discrimination hiding behind apparently neutral policies. "Have you filed any complaints with the police department?" "My daughter tried. She called the number they gave us, filed paperwork, met with someone at the station. They said they would investigate, but nothing changed. The same officer keeps approaching us with the same attitude." Maya had documented the administrative failure as well. Complaints filed, investigations promised, no behavioral changes implemented. The kind of institutional protection that enabled continued civil rights violations. Her second witness interview had been with Carlos Hernandez, the father whose family had been excluded from the soccer field. Maya had arranged to meet him at a local cafe, presenting herself as a parent concerned about fairness in community facilities. "Mr. Hernandez, I witnessed what happened at the park last Saturday. Has your family experienced similar treatment before?" Carlos had hesitated, protective instincts warring with frustration that had been building for months. "Are you asking officially?" "Because we've learned to be careful about who we trust with these stories. I'm asking as a parent who believes all families deserve equal treatment in public spaces." "Then yes, this has happened multiple times. The same officer, the same manufactured complaints, the same result. Our family being forced to leave facilities we have every right to use." Maya's questioning had revealed systematic targeting. "What pattern have you noticed in his behavior?" "He waits until our children are settled and playing, then approaches with complaints that don't match what's actually happening. Last month, he said our kids were being too loud during designated recreation hours. The month before, he claimed we were using equipment inappropriately, even though we follow every posted rule." "Have you observed him treating other families similarly?" "Only the Black and Latino families. White families can do exactly what we do, sometimes more disruptively, without any police contact at all." Maya's surveillance had confirmed Carlos's observations. Her documentation showed Williams selectively enforcing rules that he ignored when white families violated them. The kind of discriminatory pattern that federal civil rights law specifically prohibited. Her third witness interview had been with Mr. Jerome Johnson, whose Sunday basketball tradition with his son had been terminated by Williams's selective enforcement. Maya had approached him after a community meeting, maintaining her cover while gathering crucial testimony. "Mr. Johnson, I'm a parent who uses the same facilities your family does. I noticed the interaction you had with the officer last Sunday. Would you be comfortable sharing what happened?" Jerome had evaluated Maya carefully before responding. "Sister, are you asking because you're concerned about your own family's safety, or are you trying to help document what's been happening to all of us?" "Both. I believe what I witnessed was wrong, and I'm wondering if it's part of a larger pattern. then yes, it's definitely part of a pattern. That officer has targeted my son and me at least 6 times in the past 3 months. Always the same routine, approaching us when we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, then manufacturing reasons why we need to leave. Maya's questioning had revealed the psychological impact on families. How has this affected your son? Marcus used to love our Sunday basketball time. Now he asks if the mean policeman will be there. A 10-year-old shouldn't have to fear law enforcement when he's playing sports with his father in a public park. Each witness interview had confirmed the same pattern. Officer Williams systematically targeted minority families with selective enforcement designed to exclude rather than protect. Parents who tried to file complaints found their concerns dismissed or buried in bureaucratic delays. Children were learning to fear police officers instead of trusting them as community protectors. Maya's witness documentation had created a comprehensive picture of civil rights violations that local oversight had failed to address. 3 weeks of interviews revealed systematic discrimination affecting dozens of families, all implemented by a single officer who believed his actions were justified and protected. What Williams didn't know was that federal agents had been systematically documenting not just his behavior, but the institutional failures that made it possible. But what Williams was about to do would destroy his career forever, transforming a routine Saturday afternoon into a moment that would expose years of systematic abuse and change everything for countless families. The confrontation had been building for 3 weeks through a series of escalating encounters that Maya's surveillance had meticulously documented. Each interaction showed Williams becoming more aggressive, more willing to push boundaries, more confident that his actions would face no consequences. Maya had identified the warning signs during her federal training. Officers who implemented discriminatory enforcement typically escalated gradually, testing community resistance, measuring institutional support, calculating the risks of more aggressive behavior. Williams was following the textbook pattern of someone preparing for physical confrontation. His first escalation had occurred 2 weeks ago during another encounter with the Rodriguez family. Mrs. Rodriguez had brought Miguel to the playground as usual, but this time she had been joined by her daughter Carmen, Miguel's mother, who worked as a registered nurse at Chicago General Hospital. Maya had observed from her surveillance position as Williams approached their family group near the swings. His demeanor was noticeably more aggressive than previous encounters, his body language more intimidating. "Ladies, we've discussed this supervision issue before," Williams had announced, positioning himself to loom over both women. "I thought we had an understanding about appropriate use of these facilities." Carmen, unaware of the previous harassment her mother had endured, responded with the assertiveness that her professional training had taught her. "Officer, what supervision issue?" "We're watching my son play on equipment designed for his age group." Maya's surveillance equipment had captured Williams's reaction, the flush of anger at being questioned by someone he expected to submit without resistance. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the seriousness of maintaining community standards in public facilities." "What community standards is my 8-year-old violating by using playground equipment?" The challenge had clearly frustrated Williams. Maya watched him cycle through his usual intimidation tactics, manufactured complaints, vague threats, demands for compliance without justification. But Carmen's professional confidence and nursing background had prepared her to deal with difficult personalities under pressure. "Officer, I need you to explain specifically what rule my family is violating, or we're going to continue using these public facilities that our tax dollars support." Maya had documented the moment when Williams's composure cracked slightly. His voice had risen, his gestures became more animated, his language shifted from pseudo-professional to personally hostile. "People like you need to understand that there are consequences for non-compliance with police instructions, regardless of whether you think those instructions are justified." The phrase "people like you" had been crucial evidence. Williams was revealing the discriminatory motivations that drove his selective enforcement, language that federal prosecutors would use to prove civil rights violations in court. Maya's second escalation documentation had occurred the following week during Williams's encounter with a new family, the Washingtons, who had recently moved to the neighborhood. Parents Michael and Lisa brought their twin daughters to the playground. unaware they were entering Officer Williams's territory of systematic harassment. Maya had positioned herself with clear sightlines when Williams approached the family near the climbing structure. His opening was more aggressive than she'd previously observed, suggesting his confidence in using intimidation tactics was growing. "Sir, ma'am, I need to discuss some concerns about facility usage in this area," Williams had announced, standing closer to the family than professional courtesy required. Michael Washington, who worked as an accountant downtown, responded with the polite deference that many minority parents taught their children as survival strategy. "Of course, officer. What can we help you with?" "Your children are using equipment in ways that create liability issues for other families. We need them to modify their play behavior or relocate to more appropriate areas." Maya's surveillance had captured the twins playing exactly as the equipment was designed to be used. No safety violations, no inappropriate behavior, no legitimate basis for police intervention. Williams was implementing pure discrimination while maintaining the language of official authority. But Michael Washington had made the mistake of asking for clarification. "Officer, could you explain what specific behaviors you're concerned about? The girls are following all the posted rules." Williams's response had revealed his escalating willingness to use explicit threats. "Sir, when a police officer provides instruction about public safety, the appropriate response is compliance, not questioning. Continued non-compliance can result in citations, Child Protective Services involvement, or other enforcement actions." Maya had documented the constitutional violation in real time. Williams was threatening government retaliation against parents who exercised their First Amendment right to question police authority, the kind of systematic intimidation that federal civil rights law specifically prohibited. Her surveillance showed Williams's pattern of escalation reaching dangerous levels. 3 weeks of documentation revealed an officer becoming increasingly confident in his ability to use threats, intimidation, and explicit discrimination without facing consequences. The stage was set for the kind of physical confrontation that Maya's training had taught her to recognize and prepare for. Williams had systematically tested boundaries, measured resistance, and calculated that his actions were protected by institutional indifference. What he didn't understand was that federal surveillance had been documenting every escalation, every threat, every constitutional violation that local oversight had failed to address. Maya slowly turned back to face Williams, touching her cheek with unnaturally calm fingers, studying his badge number like she was memorizing evidence, because that's exactly what she was doing. The assault had happened faster than anyone expected, but Maya's federal training had prepared her for exactly this moment. 3 weeks of surveillance had shown Williams escalating toward physical violence, and now he had provided the evidence that would guarantee his federal prosecution. Comment your country and city below. Let's see where people stand for equal protection under the law globally. This demonstrates that civil rights matter everywhere. The slap had connected with Maya's left cheek with sufficient force to leave an immediate red handprint across her dark skin. Around the playground, chaos erupted as witnesses realized they had just seen a uniformed police officer assault an unarmed civilian in front of multiple children. Mrs. Carter from the corner bodega had been walking past the park when the confrontation began. Her phone had captured the entire sequence: Williams's verbal abuse, the escalation, the moment of physical violence that crossed every line of professional conduct and constitutional law. "Oh my God," Mrs. Carter whispered, her phone shaking as she continued recording. "He actually hit her." The jogger who had been circling the park's perimeter had stopped running when she heard Williams's initial threats. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, an emergency room physician at Northwestern Memorial, immediately recognized the situation as assault and began documenting evidence with her phone while preparing to provide medical assistance if needed. Most importantly, Maya's own surveillance equipment had captured everything with federal-quality audio and video. The discriminatory language, the escalating threats, the moment of impact, Williams's statements immediately afterward, all documented with the precision that federal prosecutors would need to guarantee conviction. But it was Zara's reaction that transformed this from a professional operation into something deeply personal for Maya. Her 8-year-old daughter had abandoned the swing set, running toward her mother with tears streaming down her face, not understanding why a police officer had hurt the person who was supposed to protect her. "Mama! Mama!" Zara's voice cracked with terror and confusion as she reached Maya's side. "Why did he hit you? Why did the policeman hurt you?" Maya pulled her daughter close, one arm protecting Zara while maintaining eye contact with Williams. Her federal training had taught her to remain calm during critical incidents, to continue documenting evidence, even while processing personal trauma. "Officer Derek Williams, badge number 4127, Chicago Police Department, District 18, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent playground. "You just committed assault and battery against a civilian in front of multiple witnesses, while in uniform representing the Chicago Police Department." Her legal precision should have been a warning sign to anyone with law enforcement experience. The way she catalogued information, the clinical terminology, the calm recitation of facts while her daughter sobbed against her side, these weren't the responses of a typical assault victim. Williams, high on adrenaline and righteous anger, missed every signal. "That's right, sweetheart. Remember that badge number when you're filling out your welfare applications." Officer Maria Rodriguez, Williams's partner, had been standing near their patrol car when the assault occurred. Her radio call for backup was delayed as she processed what she had just witnessed. Her partner crossing a line that would end his career and potentially destroy the department. "Derek," Rodriguez called out, her voice tight with panic. "Derek, we need to leave right now." But Williams was too intoxicated by his sense of power to recognize the danger. Maya's composed reaction, instead of intimidating him, seemed to fuel his aggression. He interpreted her calm as weakness rather than federal training. "Assault." Williams laughed, the sound harsh enough to make several children start crying. "Lady, that was barely a love tap. You want to see what real police work looks like?" Maya's response demonstrated exactly why federal agents undergo extensive training for undercover operations. While holding her traumatized daughter, while facing down an armed officer who had just committed assault against her, she maintained perfect composure and continued gathering evidence. "Officer Rodriguez," she said, addressing Williams' partner directly, "I need you to understand that this entire incident has been witnessed, recorded, and will be reported through appropriate channels." The phrase "appropriate channels" made Rodriguez's blood run cold. It wasn't the language of an angry civilian threatening to file complaints that would disappear into administrative limbo. It was the language of someone who knew exactly which federal agencies to contact, which laws had been violated, which procedures would guarantee investigation and prosecution. Williams remained oblivious to the warning signs that were obvious to his more experienced partner. "Report it to whoever you want, Princess. Nobody cares what people like you have to say." As he strutted back toward their patrol car, confident that he had successfully intimidated another minority family into silence, Williams had no idea that he had just committed multiple federal crimes against a sworn law enforcement officer who had been building a case against him for 3 weeks. The surveillance operation had just become evidence of federal assault, civil rights violations, and institutional failure that would reshape policing in Chicago. Maya held her sobbing daughter while calculating how to transition from undercover surveillance to the federal prosecution that would follow. Within hours, the video had been shared over 100,000 times, and Maya's story was trending nationwide as social media transformed a local incident into a catalyst for national conversations about police accountability and civil rights. Mrs. Carter's phone footage had captured the assault from the perfect angle. Clear view of Williams's face, crisp audio of his discriminatory language, the unmistakable sound of palm meeting cheek. She had posted the video to Facebook within minutes of the incident, adding a simple caption, "This just happened at Riverside Park. A police officer slapped a mother in front of her child. Everyone needs to see this." The video exploded across social media platforms with the viral velocity that accompanies genuinely shocking content. Facebook shares led to Twitter retweets. Instagram stories amplified the footage. TikTok users created response videos, analyzing every frame of the assault. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the emergency room physician who had witnessed the incident while jogging, had captured a different angle that showed Zara's traumatized reaction. Her footage, posted to Twitter with the hashtag #YourJusticeForMaya, provided the emotional context that transformed viewer outrage into activist energy. "I'm an ER doctor," Dr. Martinez had written in her viral tweet. "I've seen assault victims. This woman's composure wasn't shock, it was training. Something tells me Officer Williams just made the worst mistake of his career." Police accountability, Chang civil rights. The hashtag Justice for Maya began trending within 6 hours of the incident. Social media users were sharing the videos, adding their own stories of police harassment, demanding accountability from Chicago Police Department leadership. The kind of organic online movement that forces institutional responses. But it was the third video that made the story truly explosive. The park's security camera had captured the entire confrontation from a wide angle that showed the context leading up to the assault. This footage revealed Williams's systematic harassment, his escalating aggression, the moment when verbal abuse became physical violence. Chicago activists who had been documenting police misconduct for years immediately recognized the significance of the security footage. This wasn't just another incident of officer brutality. It was systematic discrimination, captured with bureaucratic precision. "This is what we've been trying to tell people for years," posted Marcus Johnson, a community organizer whose own family had experienced harassment by Officer Williams. "This officer has been terrorizing Black and Latino families for months. Finally, someone got it on video." Marcus's post included screenshots of complaints his organization had filed against Williams, reports that had been dismissed or buried in administrative processes. The social media evidence created a timeline that showed systematic abuse enabled by institutional indifference. National news outlets began picking up the story by evening. CNN's initial report focused on the assault itself, playing Mrs. Carter's footage, while interviewing constitutional law experts about federal civil rights violations. The Chiron read, "Officer slaps mother in Chicago Park. Federal investigation likely." MSNBC took a broader approach, using Dr. Martinez's footage to examine the psychological impact of police violence on children. Child psychologists discussed the trauma visible in Zara's reaction, the long-term effects of witnessing authority figures commit violence against parents. Fox News coverage focused on the community response, interviewing neighbors who expressed shock at Williams's behavior while carefully avoiding questions about systematic discrimination. Their segment emphasized that this appeared to be an isolated incident by a single officer, rather than part of institutional patterns. But social media users weren't accepting sanitized narratives about isolated incidents. The hashtag #YourJusticeForMaya had evolved into a pattern of abuse as community members shared their own experiences with Officer Williams and systematic discrimination in Chicago's South Side neighborhoods. The Facebook group Riverside Park Families exploded with testimonials that painted a comprehensive picture of Williams's behavior. Parents posted photographs of previous encounters, shared audio recordings of threatening phone calls they'd received after filing complaints, documented the administrative maze that had buried their reports. Maria Santos, whose family had stopped visiting the park after Williams's harassment, posted a detailed timeline. March 15th. Officer Williams told my son he was too aggressive for playground equipment. March 29th. Same officer questioned whether I had proper supervision while watching 3 kids. April 12th. He threatened CPS involvement when I asked for his supervisor's name. We stopped coming after that. Each testimony added another layer to the pattern that Maya's federal surveillance had been documenting. Social media was accomplishing what official complaints had failed to achieve, creating undeniable evidence of systematic discrimination that institutions could no longer ignore. The viral momentum reached critical mass when Chicago Tribune reporter Angela Washington, no relation to Maya, connected the dots between the assault video and months of ignored complaints. Her investigative piece, published online that evening, included interviews with 17 families who had experienced harassment by Williams. The officer who slapped a mother at Riverside Park yesterday has been the subject of 47 formal complaints over 3 years, Washington wrote. 0 resulted in disciplinary action. The assault captured on video represents an escalation of behavior that the Chicago Police Department has failed to address, despite overwhelming evidence of systematic civil rights violations. The Tribune article included photos of complaint forms, recordings of phone calls to Internal Affairs, documentation of the administrative processes that had protected Williams while exposing community members to continued harassment. The kind of institutional failure that social media users could analyze and share with devastating precision. Twitter user, Young Chicago activist, compiled a thread that went viral within hours. Thread: Officer Derek Williams has been terrorizing families for years. Here's what the Chicago Police Department doesn't want you to see. The thread included screenshots of complaints, audio recordings of threatening encounters, photographs of families being forced from public spaces. By midnight, the story had reached national television. CNN's Anderson Cooper led his show with the assault footage, followed by interviews with civil rights attorneys who explained the federal implications of a police officer attacking civilians based on racial bias. What we're seeing in this video isn't just assault, explained civil rights attorney David Chen. It's a federal crime under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, which criminalizes the willful violation of constitutional rights by someone acting under color of law. This officer could face 8 years in federal prison. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow used her opening segment to examine the institutional failures that had enabled Williams's behavior. Her researchers had obtained copies of the 47 complaints filed against Williams, showing how each had been dismissed, delayed, or buried in administrative procedures. The question isn't just what this officer did, Maddow explained to her national audience. The question is how many supervisors, how many administrators, how many department officials knew about this pattern and chose to protect the officer instead of the community he was terrorizing. Social media platforms began implementing special features to amplify the story. Twitter added an official moment compilation of videos, witness statements, and expert analysis. Facebook's algorithm pushed the content to users interested in civil rights and police accountability. Instagram influencers with millions of followers shared the footage with calls for justice and reform. The viral explosion had accomplished what 3 years of formal complaints had failed to achieve, creating public pressure that institutions couldn't ignore. By dawn, Chicago Police Department's phone lines were jammed with calls demanding Williams's immediate termination and federal investigation. Mayor Lori Lightfoot's office issued a carefully worded statement. The city of Chicago takes all allegations of police misconduct seriously. The incident at Riverside Park is under investigation by Internal Affairs and appropriate federal agencies. We are committed to accountability and justice for all residents. But social media users weren't satisfied with bureaucratic language. The hashtag #FraudenNotEnoughLightfoot began trending, with users demanding specific timelines for action, federal oversight of the investigation, and systematic reforms to prevent future incidents. Community organizers used the viral momentum to announce a rally for the following evening at Riverside Park. Justice for Maya, Justice for All Families was expected to draw thousands of participants demanding accountability and reform. What Officer Williams had intended as routine intimidation of another minority family had become a national story about police accountability, civil rights, and institutional failure. The viral explosion had transformed local harassment into federal evidence that would reshape how Chicago approached community policing. Maya Johnson, still processing the assault while comforting her traumatized daughter, had no idea that her careful federal surveillance operation had just become the catalyst for nationwide demands for police reform and justice. The color drained from Williams's face when he learned who he had really assaulted, but the full scope of the federal investigation that was about to destroy his career was only beginning to unfold. The call had come at 7:47 a.m., interrupting Chicago Police Commander Patricia Hayes' first cup of coffee and what should have been a quiet Monday morning review of weekend incidents. She had been scanning Williams's sanitized report. No mention of physical contact, no reference to assault, just another routine encounter with a non-compliant civilian, when her phone rang. Commander Hayes, this is Deputy Director Sarah Anderson from the FBI's Chicago Field Office. I need to discuss the Riverside Park incident from yesterday. Hayes pulled up Williams's report on her screen, the sanitized version still glowing in neat bureaucratic paragraphs. I'm not sure what federal interest there might be in a minor neighborhood dispute, Deputy Director. Ma'am, I need you to pull the personnel file for Officer Derek Williams immediately. And I need the original incident report, not the amended version that's currently in your system. The words hit Hayes like ice water. The amended version. She had approved Williams's report herself, noting how cleanly it avoided any problematic details. Now the FBI was suggesting there were multiple versions. I'm not sure I understand. Commander, the civilian who was assaulted in your officer's report, her name is Special Agent Maya Johnson. She's been conducting federal civil rights surveillance in your district for 3 weeks under deep cover. The phone slipped from Hayes's hand, clattering against her desk. Around her, the precinct continued its normal Monday morning rhythm, officers filing reports, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. But her world had just tilted completely off its axis. She retrieved the phone with shaking hands. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Special Agent Johnson was embedded in your community documenting patterns of discriminatory enforcement. What your officer did yesterday, assaulting a federal agent in the line of duty while violating the civil rights of local residents, that's now a federal crime with mandatory prosecution guidelines. Hayes's mind raced through the implications. A federal agent assaulted by one of her officers while conducting official federal business. The viral video that had been circulating on social media wasn't just evidence of police brutality, it was documentation of multiple federal crimes. Deputy Director, if there's been some misunderstanding, there's no misunderstanding, Commander. Agent Johnson has been building a comprehensive case documenting systematic civil rights violations in your district. Officer Williams's assault yesterday was recorded from multiple angles, including Agent Johnson's own surveillance equipment. Meanwhile, 6 blocks away in the FBI's Chicago field office, Special Agent Maya Johnson sat across from Deputy Director Anderson, her left cheek still bearing the faint bruise from Williams's assault. Gone was the casual park mother persona. Her dark suit was crisp, her bearing unmistakably professional. Her voice, carrying the authority that Derek Williams had never suspected, lay beneath her carefully constructed cover. Ma'am, I recommend we move to Phase 2 immediately, Maya reported, sliding a thick file across the conference table. The assault yesterday, combined with the evidence I've collected over the past 3 weeks, gives us everything we need for federal civil rights charges. Anderson opened the file, revealing photographs, transcripts, video evidence, witness statements, a comprehensive case that transformed isolated incidents into systematic abuse. Walk me through what you documented before yesterday's incident. Maya's presentation was meticulous, professional, and devastating. 17 separate incidents of discriminatory enforcement. 12 families forced to leave public spaces without cause. 8 children subjected to inappropriate questioning and searches. Multiple false reports filed to justify unconstitutional behavior. She clicked through photographs on her laptop. Officer Williams targeted the Rodriguez family for loitering while they watched their grandson play. The Hernandez children were ordered off playground equipment, deemed inappropriate for their type. Mr. Johnson's 10-year-old son was forced to empty his pockets while shooting basketball alone. Each image, each incident report, each witness statement built an undeniable case of systematic civil rights violations. But it was the final video that changed everything. Yesterday's assault captured from Maya's own recording device with crystal clear audio and video. Agent Johnson, Anderson said quietly, you understand this changes your role in this investigation completely. Yes, ma'am. I'm no longer just the investigating officer. I'm also the victim of a federal crime. Back at the police station, Commander Hayes was making the phone call that would end Derek Williams's career. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice still swaggering with yesterday's confidence. Williams here. Williams, I need you to report to my office immediately. Bring Rodriguez. Is this about that incident yesterday? Because I filed a complete report and Rodriguez can verify. Williams, just get here now. 20 minutes later, Derek Williams swaggered into Hayes's office with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he was untouchable. Maria Rodriguez followed, her face pale with apprehension that proved more justified than she realized. Sir, if this is about yesterday, I want to reiterate that the subject was completely non-compliant and potentially dangerous. Shut up, Derek. Hayes's voice cut through his prepared justifications. The woman you assaulted yesterday is a federal agent. The silence stretched like a held breath. Rodriguez actually gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Williams's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something approaching panic. That's impossible. She was just some welfare mom with Special Agent Maya Johnson, FBI Civil Rights Division. She's been conducting federal surveillance of discriminatory policing practices in our district for 3 weeks. And yesterday, you provided her with evidence that will destroy both your career and potentially this entire department. The civil rights attorneys arrived with files on 17 families who had suffered similar treatment, transforming Maya's individual assault into a class action lawsuit that would expose the full scope of systematic discrimination in Chicago's South Side communities. Attorney Jennifer Kim, from the ACLU's Chicago office, had been monitoring social media coverage of the Riverside Park incident when she recognized the broader implications. The viral video showed more than isolated police brutality. It revealed systematic civil rights violations that had been affecting multiple families for years. This isn't just about one assault, Kim explained to her team during an emergency Monday morning meeting. The social media testimonials, the community complaints, the federal surveillance, we're looking at a class action case that could reshape policing practices across the entire district. Her paralegal, Marcus Thompson, had spent Sunday evening compiling social media posts from families, sharing their experiences with Officer Williams. The testimonials painted a picture of systematic harassment that perfectly matched the pattern Maya's federal surveillance had documented. We have 17 families ready to join a class action suit, Thompson reported. Each story follows the same pattern: discriminatory enforcement, manufactured complaints, threats when parents questioned authority. The kind of systematic abuse that federal civil rights law specifically prohibits. Kim's strategy was comprehensive and devastating. Rather than focusing solely on Maya's assault, the lawsuit would expose Williams's entire pattern of discriminatory behavior, the institutional failures that enabled it, and the department-wide policies that protected officers while abandoning community members. The complaint, filed in federal court Tuesday morning, named Officer Derek Williams, Commander Patricia Hayes, and the City of Chicago as defendants. The charges included systematic civil rights violations, failure to provide equal protection under law, and institutional indifference to constitutional rights of minority residents. For over 3 years, the complaint stated, Officer Derek Williams engaged in a pattern of discriminatory enforcement designed to exclude Black and Latino families from public spaces. Despite 47 formal complaints documenting this behavior, the Chicago Police Department failed to investigate, discipline, or stop the constitutional violations. The lawsuit's most powerful section detailed the impact on families. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson, Miguel, asking why he couldn't play on equipment designed for his age group. The Hernandez children, learning to fear police officers instead of trusting them as community protectors. Mr. Johnson's son, Marcus, developing anxiety about visiting public spaces. These families suffered psychological trauma, loss of access to public facilities, and violation of their fundamental constitutional rights, the complaint continued. Children learned to fear law enforcement. Parents taught survival strategies instead of civic engagement. Communities experienced systematic exclusion from spaces their tax dollars supported. Media coverage of the lawsuit filing amplified the story beyond the initial viral video. CNN's legal correspondent analyzed the federal implications. This class action doesn't just seek monetary damages. It demands institutional reform, federal oversight, and systematic changes to prevent future violations. The lawsuit's demand for injunctive relief was particularly significant. Beyond financial compensation for affected families, Kim was seeking federal court orders requiring police department reforms, mandatory civil rights training, civilian oversight boards, and external monitoring of complaint processes. Money alone can't repair the harm these families suffered, Kim explained during a press conference on the federal courthouse steps. We need systematic changes that ensure no other community experiences the kind of discrimination that Officer Williams implemented with impunity. The 17 plaintiff families stood behind Kim during the press conference, their presence providing visual testimony to the scope of Williams's systematic abuse. Mrs. Rodriguez held Miguel's hand as reporters asked about his trauma from being excluded from playground equipment. Carlos Hernandez spoke about his children's questions about police officers being good guys or bad guys. "Our kids shouldn't have to fear law enforcement," Hernandez told the assembled media. "They should feel protected, not targeted. This lawsuit is about making sure other families don't experience what we've endured." The City of Chicago's response was immediate and defensive. Corporation Counsel Ana Valencia issued a statement denying systematic discrimination while acknowledging the need for continued police training and community engagement. "The city disputes the allegations in this lawsuit," Valencia stated. "While we take all complaints seriously, we believe the incident involving Officer Williams was isolated and not representative of department-wide practices or policies. But social media users weren't accepting the city's denials. The hashtag #Thuka17FamilyStrong began trending as community members shared additional stories of harassment, discrimination, and systematic exclusion from public spaces. Each testimony added weight to the class action complaint and pressure for comprehensive reform. Legal experts predicted the lawsuit would result in a multi-million-dollar settlement and federal consent decree governing Chicago Police Department operations. The kind of institutional oversight that transforms how law enforcement agencies interact with minority communities. "This case has all the elements federal courts look for in systematic civil rights violations," explained constitutional law professor David Martinez from Northwestern University. "Pattern of abuse, institutional indifference, clear discriminatory intent, and comprehensive documentation. The plaintiffs have an incredibly strong case." For Maya Johnson, the class action lawsuit represented vindication not just for her own assault, but for the community members whose complaints had been ignored for years. Her federal surveillance had provided the evidence that made comprehensive justice possible. The 17 families who had suffered Williams's harassment were finally being heard by institutions with the power to create lasting change. 6 weeks later, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with the kind of media attention that transforms local incidents into national conversations about justice and accountability, as Derek Williams faced the consequences of systematically underestimating the people he was sworn to protect. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs reading "Justice for Maya" and "End Police Impunity," while news vans lined the street with satellite dishes pointed skyward like prayers for accountability. The viral video that had started everything continued playing on screens across the nation, but now it represented something larger, proof that systematic discrimination would finally face consequences. Inside courtroom 1847, Derek Williams sat at the defendant's table, wearing the ill-fitting suit of a man whose world had collapsed completely. Gone was the swagger, the uniform, the authority that once made families scatter from playgrounds. In its place sat a hollow shell facing federal charges that carried mandatory minimum sentences. Federal Judge Patricia Morrison reviewed the plea agreement with the clinical precision that had defined her 20-year career on the bench. The courtroom was packed with community members, media representatives, and the 17 families whose civil rights Williams had systematically violated. "Mr. Williams," Judge Morrison began, "you understand that by pleading guilty to federal civil rights violations under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, you are admitting to willfully depriving multiple civilians of their constitutional rights while acting under color of law." "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was barely audible, a whisper from someone who had learned too late that actions have consequences. "And you understand that this plea agreement includes your cooperation with ongoing federal investigations into systematic civil rights violations within the Chicago Police Department." "Yes, Your Honor." In the gallery's front row, Maya Johnson sat with her FBI credentials clearly visible on her lapel. Beside her, 8-year-old Zara fidgeted in her best dress, still too young to fully understand the proceedings, but old enough to recognize that the man who had hurt her mother was being held accountable. Judge Morrison continued reading the terms that would reshape Williams's life forever. 18 months federal imprisonment, 3 years supervised release, mandatory civil rights training, prohibition from law enforcement employment, and payment of restitution to affected community members and families. The individual sentence was significant, but the broader implications were unprecedented. Williams's plea agreement had triggered a comprehensive federal investigation that resulted in institutional reforms affecting the entire Chicago Police Department. Furthermore, Judge Morrison stated, this court notes that the defendant's actions have triggered federal oversight resulting in systematic reforms within the Chicago Police Department. A consent decree now governs department operations, mandating external monitoring of hiring, training, and disciplinary procedures. The reforms were comprehensive and mandatory. Every officer would complete 40 hours of civil rights and de-escalation training annually. Body cameras were now required for all civilian interactions. Community oversight boards had been established with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. Most importantly, the administrative limbo that had buried previous complaints was replaced with a federal reporting system that tracked patterns of abuse across individual officers and entire precincts. Never again would systematic discrimination hide behind bureaucratic delays. Assistant U.S. Attorney Janet Kim addressed the court with the authority of federal law enforcement, finally responding to systematic abuse. Your Honor, this case represents more than one officer's criminal conduct. The evidence shows a pattern of discriminatory enforcement that violated the constitutional rights of an entire community. Kim's presentation detailed the scope of Williams's systematic abuse: 17 families harassed, dozens of children traumatized, community members excluded from public spaces they helped fund through their tax dollars. The kind of comprehensive civil rights violations that federal law specifically prohibited. Today's conviction sends a clear message, Kim continued, that federal law enforcement will not tolerate constitutional violations regardless of the perpetrator's uniform or authority. Equal protection under law is not negotiable. Commander Patricia Hayes sat in the second row, knowing her own career hung in the balance. The federal investigation had discovered her signature on administrative decisions that enabled Williams's pattern of abuse. Her testimony in the civil rights lawsuit had revealed the institutional culture that prioritized officer protection over community safety. The settlement negotiations for the class action lawsuit were approaching 8 figures, money that could have funded community programs instead of compensating for institutional failure. Hayes would testify next week about departmental policies that had made Williams's systematic discrimination possible. Officer Maria Rodriguez, Williams's former partner, had resigned from the force 6 months earlier. Her cooperation with federal investigators had been crucial to understanding how discriminatory enforcement operated with institutional protection. Her testimony about departmental culture, about pressure to support fellow officers regardless of their conduct, had become essential evidence in the broader institutional case. The impact on our community cannot be overstated, Attorney Kim explained to Judge Morrison. Families stopped using public parks. Children developed fear of police officers. Parents taught survival strategies instead of civic engagement. The defendant didn't just violate individual rights, he terrorized an entire neighborhood. As Judge Morrison prepared to impose the sentence, she addressed Williams directly with words that would echo through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Mr. Williams, your actions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of your role as a police officer. You are not an occupying force in these communities. You are not entitled to treat citizens differently based on race or economic status. You took an oath to protect and serve all residents equally, and you violated that oath in the most egregious manner possible. Commander Hayes contemplated the wreckage of what should have been a routine Monday morning, as settlement negotiations approached 8 figures and federal oversight transformed every aspect of how Chicago police interacted with the communities they were sworn to protect. The conference room at City Hall had become a battlefield where decades of institutional failure met federal accountability. Corporation Counsel Anna Valencia sat across from ACLU attorney Jennifer Kim, both women surrounded by boxes of evidence that documented systematic civil rights violations dating back 3 years. The city's current offer is inadequate, Kim stated, sliding a counter-proposal across the polished conference table. $8.7 million for 17 families, plus comprehensive institutional reforms, plus federal monitoring for 5 years minimum. Valencia reviewed the demands with the careful precision of someone calculating political and financial damage. The settlement would represent one of the largest civil rights payouts in Chicago's history, but fighting the case in court would likely result in even higher damages, plus additional federal oversight. Ms. Kim, the city maintains that Officer Williams was acting outside departmental policy and training. We dispute claims of institutional discrimination or systematic civil rights violations. Then let's review the evidence again. Kim opened a file containing Williams's personnel record, 3 years of complaints, and the administrative decisions that had protected him while exposing community members to continued harassment. The documentation was devastating. 47 formal complaints against Williams, each one buried in bureaucratic processes that Commander Hayes had overseen personally. Families forced to navigate administrative mazes that discouraged follow-up while protecting officers from consequences. Mrs. Rodriguez's complaint about Miguel being excluded from playground equipment, dismissed after a 15-minute investigation that never interviewed witnesses or reviewed security footage. The Hernandez family's report of discriminatory enforcement, classified as unfounded, without speaking to the responding officer or examining their claims. Every complaint followed the same pattern, Kim explained, spreading incident reports across the conference table. Families file formal complaints documenting constitutional violations. Those complaints disappear into administrative processes designed to protect officers rather than address misconduct. The financial calculations were staggering. $8.7 million divided among 17 families, with additional funds for community healing programs, trauma counseling for affected children, and institutional reforms that would prevent future systematic discrimination. But the real cost was institutional credibility. The consent decree governing Chicago Police Department operations represented federal acknowledgement that local oversight had failed completely. Every hiring decision, every training program, every disciplinary action would now require federal approval. Valencia's phone buzzed with updates from Mayor Lightfoot's office. Public pressure was intensifying as social media campaigns demanded accountability beyond individual officer punishment. The hashtag touches systemic reform was trending with demands for comprehensive changes to police culture and community relationships. The federal monitoring requirements are extensive, Valencia noted, reviewing Kim's settlement proposal. Civilian oversight boards with real authority, quarterly reports to federal courts, external auditing of complaint processes. This essentially places the entire department under federal supervision. That's exactly what should happen when local institutions fail to protect constitutional rights, Kim responded. These families trusted the system to address their complaints. Instead, they found systematic protection of the officer who was violating their rights. The negotiation paused as Valencia consulted with Mayor Lightfoot's representatives by phone. The political implications were significant. Accepting the settlement would acknowledge systematic failures while fighting it would risk even larger damages and more comprehensive federal oversight. Kim used the break to review testimonials from the 17 plaintiff families. Each story detailed not just Williams's discriminatory enforcement, but the institutional failures that enabled it. Parents who filed complaints only to watch them disappear into administrative black holes. Children who learned to fear police officers instead of trusting them as community protectors. Miguel Rodriguez, now 9 years old, still asked his grandmother why the mean policeman had made him leave playground equipment. The Hernandez children avoided parks where they might encounter officers. Mr. Johnson's son Marcus had developed anxiety about visiting public spaces where police might question his right to belong. These families deserve more than monetary compensation, Kim explained when negotiations resumed. They deserve assurance that no other community will experience the systematic discrimination they endured. The settlement terms extended beyond individual compensation to include comprehensive reforms. Federal monitoring of police training programs, civilian oversight boards with investigative authority, quarterly reports to federal courts tracking complaint patterns and resolution rates. Most significantly, the settlement established a community healing fund that would provide trauma counseling for affected children, community policing programs designed to rebuild trust, and educational initiatives that taught families about their constitutional rights. "This isn't just about punishment," Kim told assembled media after the day's negotiations. "This is about transformation. These families suffered systematic discrimination because institutions failed to protect them. The settlement must ensure those institutional failures never happen again." Valencia's response was carefully measured, acknowledging harm while limiting admission of systematic wrongdoing. The city takes these allegations seriously and remains committed to constitutional policing practices that serve all residents equally. But community members weren't satisfied with bureaucratic language. The rallies at Riverside Park had continued weekly, drawing hundreds of participants demanding accountability and reform. Speakers included the 17 plaintiff families, community organizers, and Maya Johnson herself, no longer undercover, but openly advocating for the systematic changes her surveillance had made possible. 1 year later, Riverside Park looked exactly the same but felt completely different, as Maya Johnson sat on the same bench where everything had changed, watching Zara navigate the monkey bars with the fearless confidence that childhood should always possess. The playground equipment gleamed in the afternoon sun, maintained by city crews who now received annual civil rights training as part of the federal consent decree. Children's laughter echoed across green spaces, where families of every background spread pickets without fear or hesitation, their safety protected by comprehensive reforms that had transformed policing throughout Chicago's South Side communities. "Mama, look!" Zara called out, hanging upside down from the parallel bars with the joyful abandon that had returned gradually over months of therapy and healing. "I'm not scared anymore." The simple statement carried profound meaning. Not scared of playgrounds where police officers might approach with manufactured complaints. Not scared that being black in public spaces made her family a target for harassment. Not scared that the people sworn to protect her might hurt her mother instead. Maya watched her daughter play while reviewing the institutional changes that one moment of systematic discrimination had ultimately created. The federal consent decree governing Chicago Police Department operations had become a national model for community-oriented law enforcement that actually served and protected rather than controlled and intimidated. Officer Maria Rodriguez approached the bench, her uniform replaced by the civilian clothes of someone who had chosen a different career path. She had resigned from the force 8 months ago, unable to reconcile her oath to protect and serve with the institutional culture she had witnessed and initially enabled through her silence. "Agent Johnson, Maya, I hope it's okay that I'm here. I wanted to see how the community policing initiatives are working. Please sit. And yes, the changes are remarkable." They sat together watching children play without the specter of discriminatory enforcement hanging over their families. The new community policing policies required officers to participate in neighborhood events, learn residents' names and stories, understand their role as community partners rather than occupying forces. "The training programs you helped design are making a real difference," Rodriguez said quietly. "New recruits spend 2 weeks in community immersion before they ever put on a badge. They learn about families, backgrounds, the humanity of people they'll serve." Maya nodded, remembering the months of consultation with federal oversight boards that had designed the new training protocols. Officers now learned de-escalation techniques, cultural competency, constitutional law, and the historical context of police-community relations that made trust-building essential. The federal consent decree had transformed every aspect of police operations. Mandatory body cameras ensured accountability during every civilian interaction. Civilian oversight boards with real investigative authority replaced the administrative processes that had buried complaints. Federal monitoring tracked patterns of behavior across individual officers and entire precincts. "What about Derek Williams?" Rodriguez asked, though she already knew the answer from news reports. "He was released 3 months ago. Community service, continued federal supervision, prohibited from law enforcement permanently. He's required to speak at police academies about the consequences of constitutional violations. It wasn't revenge, Maya reflected. It was accountability. The systematic response that prevented future Derek Williams from believing they could assault civilians without consequences, while creating institutional changes that protected communities from systematic discrimination. Her phone buzzed with a message from Deputy Director Anderson. Phoenix PD requesting consultation on discriminatory policing patterns. 3-week embedded investigation. Interested? Maya looked at Zara, now teaching a younger child how to navigate the climbing structure with patience and encouragement. Then she looked at Rodriguez, who was considering law school to become a civil rights attorney, focused on police accountability. The work continues, Maya said, showing Rodriguez the message. Communities across the country face similar challenges. Families who deserve to feel safe in public spaces. Children who should grow up trusting that justice actually works. The settlement from the class action lawsuit had funded comprehensive community healing programs, trauma counseling for affected children, educational initiatives about constitutional rights, community policing programs designed to rebuild trust between law enforcement and residents. Most importantly, the administrative maze that had buried previous complaints was replaced with transparent processes that tracked every report from filing to resolution. Families now had direct access to federal oversight boards when local institutions failed to address their concerns. As the afternoon sun began to set over Riverside Park, Maya reflected on how one moment of calculated cruelty had exposed systematic failure and sparked changes that would protect thousands of families for generations to come. Sometimes justice moved slowly through federal investigations, institutional reforms, and comprehensive policy changes. Sometimes it required agents sitting on park benches, documenting violations that local authorities preferred to ignore. Sometimes it took a single black mother refusing to be invisible, refusing to accept that constitutional rights were conditional. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered if speaking up would matter? Maya's story proves that our voices, our videos, our witness testimony can be the evidence that changes everything. What would you have done in that park that day? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember that ordinary people have the power to demand extraordinary change when they refuse to stay silent. Thank you to everyone who typed justice and shared your locations with us. From America to Canada, from the UK to Australia, seeing support for civil rights worldwide proves that equality is a universal value. If this story moved you, please subscribe for more stories about accountability and justice. Until next time, remember that sometimes the system works exactly as it should when we demand that it work.